Welcome to episode 8 of the Lay of the Land podcast from the Scottish Land Commission. I am your host, Calum Maclean. As the Edinburgh International Festival returns to Scotland's capital, we are delighted to welcome Judith Doherty, the founder and co-artistic director of Gridiron. Gridiron specialises in site-specific and location theatre, who over the past 27 years have created performances and shows which transport audiences from the traditional theatre setting and into unusual and unused spaces. From forests, playgrounds and derelict buildings, Judith takes us on a journey of her experiences of working with the land in creating theatre which has land at its heart. Please welcome Judith. Well, Jude, for those that aren't familiar, can you tell me what is site-specific theatre and how did Gridiron come about in the first place?
Okay, so site-specific theatre gets a lot of different names. There's no one consensus about it, what it is. It is quite often called site-specific or site-responsive or location theatre. Quite often immersive is a term that's used, but basically it's when the show and the location are possibly a bit more closely matched than going to a conventional theatre space. Now, sometimes a conventional theatre can be site-specific because it's a play about a play. So, for instance, for us, we'll call something site-specific if we put it, say we've done a show that is about being in a playground, but we put it on a playing field. That would be sort of site-specific because we're in the show, but we're not necessarily in the playground. But if we put it in a playground, then that is site-specific. So we did a show in Edinburgh Airport quite a few years ago about global air travel, and you couldn't get more site-specific than that. But Gridiron came about nearly 28 years ago when Ben Harrison, who's my co-artistic director, and I were both at Edinburgh University and involved in the Bedlam Theatre there. And Ben directed a play that took part half in the theatre and then half across the road in Greyfriars Kirkyard. And I was the venue manager for the Fringe that year, 1994. Mm-hmm. And I had to become involved a lot in sorting out things with the police and sorting out licensing and sorting out permissions to be in the graveyard. And the show was about Burke and Hare, the body snatchers. So it was very, very early in a sort of site-specific being in Edinburgh, being in Britain. And at one point during the show, there was a beautiful student actor dying in a very sort of orgasmic fashion against the back wall of Greyfriars Kirkyard. And just at her point of death, the castle in the background turned blood red. Edinburgh Castle turned blood red. Couldn't have been more perfect. The timing, everyone was like, the audience were like, how did they do that? And we were like, oh my God, how did we do that? But of course it was the technical rehearsal for the tattoo. So immediately that made us go, oh, so when the real world can collide with the art that you're making, magical things, unexpected things can happen. Sometimes good, sometimes not so good. A member of the press also set off a wasp's nest during that show, and that was not good. So after that, Ben and I decided, we best set up a company to work together. And as soon as we both graduated, there we go.
When you're making a piece of theatre or when you're creating something, what comes first? Is it the story you've got or is it the location that you want to use?
Well, we've done it both ways. Very often we'll have an idea and it'll be dictated by something that Ben wants to direct or write about, or another artist that we've identified that we really like, and we go, have you got any ideas? And they'll present an idea and then I'll tootle off and look for the location to make it happen in. But other times we have been presented with a city or, we've had a couple of European Capital of Culture commissions in Cork and in Stavanger in Norway, and they'll go, we'd like you to come and make a show. And off we go and we research the city, we research the people that live there or the countryside area, or we look at the buildings that are there and develop a show that way. Both are great from my point of view. Having the idea first, I find a little bit more satisfying because then it grows then we research a place and the buildings and things. So, for instance, the show that we're doing at the International Festival this year, when the International Festival approached us to say, we might commission you and we'd like you to do a show in Leith Academy. That was like very, very clear cut. It would be Leith Academy, develop a show, give us your idea, and we'll see where we go from there. So it can happen always, but at the heart of everything are the artists, and then a deep understanding and grasp of the land or the building that you're going to do it in, and what happens, what the constituency is of that area.
I've got a slightly very biased question in my own interest. Have you ever based a piece of theatre in a loch in water at all? So
not in Scotland, but in Norway. Oh my God, I think it's possibly one of my favourite professional experiences. We made a show on a little boat builder's island in Stavanger Harbour, in the fjord in Stavanger, and we had to row. We had to learn how to row to get to work in the morning. The boat, it was traditional wooden boats. Oh my God, it was just gorgeous. And it was also a sort of culture centre. So they took adults and young people who'd sort of fallen out of society and brought them and taught them, gave them time on this island and gave them a skill of working with wood. But the audience were collected on a sort of a passenger ferry that they had refurbished in Stavanger Harbour. But the island, I mean, tiny island about the size of 2 sheds, like massive sheds. But they found it hilarious the way most of us would row across the fjord to work in the morning, because I like rowing forward, because that makes sense to me. And they were just like, that's the way our 5-year-olds row. But just being with the water, being at the mercy of the tides, and it was in October time in Norway, and they had the highest tide for 10 years. So we had a couple of boat captains that worked with us. There's twice that they basically had to crash into the island to dock the boat. All the Norwegians in the audience were like, that's fine, that's what we do. And we were all like, oh my God. Yeah.
So you've obviously got lots of different challenges and problems maybe to solve making these performances. Compared to a traditional theatre show, what would be the main challenges? What kind of things if you had to overcome in terms of the land and locations that you've used?
Well, the first thing is always ownership. The first thing, it can be quite difficult to find out who actually owns something. So sometimes it can be a little bit more straightforward going through something like the National Trust for Scotland or a council-owned piece of land or building, because quite often they'll be more set up for even just understanding why you might want to do this in the first place. And there might even be a whole department that's about events, so that they kind of understand where you're coming from. But then if you find a piece of woodland in the middle of an estate somewhere and you're not entirely sure who owns it or who factors it, or, what the access is, that can take, I love that bit. That's you can find out some really rich stuff just by the act of research. Then with buildings, our biggest problem that really noticeable over the 27 years we've been going is refurbishment, sort of. When a building is commercially owned, it's harder then to convince the owner or factor to give you permission to use it for 6 weeks in August or 6 weeks in November, when we really need to know like a year in advance so that we can do all our planning. So there are a lot of buildings, like city regeneration is great. It's not so good when you're trying to find lots of crumbly old, atmospheric buildings. So that can be quite sad. There are a number of buildings in Edinburgh that I walked past for 15, 20 years, desperately trying to get permission to use them. Nothing ever happened. And now they're like not there, and they're student flats. When you're working with sort of commercial property people, it's about the right person answering the phone on the right day, and whoever owns the building, there's a number of times it has come down to, oh, well, my son or daughter is doing costume at Edinburgh College of Art. So, oh, that sounds really interesting. We'll not put it up for rent now for a couple of months and let you do your thing. I think tax breaks can be quite attractive because we're a registered charity as well. So if they let us use a big expensive building for a couple of months, then they get to not pay rates and tax on it for a while. But often the decision has to be made so late on in the day that it just puts a huge amount of pressure on us artistically. But you kind of have to roll with it.
Do you think it's become easier or more difficult since you started to get access to land, to whether it's indoors or outdoors, to use these places?
It's a game of two halves, really, because it's become much more usual since we started for people to do cultural events of all natures in unusual places. So people are more, people can understand more what the benefit is of it and why you would want to do it. But then it has become more difficult because insurances are more expensive, because people have had more events around them. They know, how difficult it can be, what a difference it can make to a piece of land or a building to have even a small number of people trotting through it on a regular basis for a period of time. And just availability, sort of regeneration, need for more housing, both sort of urban and rural, has just made, and also crushingly difficult financial situations for every single part of society means that somebody that would have maybe been more altruistic and said, oh yeah, we'll charge you X amount for 6 weeks, it's fine. Now maybe don't have the freedom to do that. So all in all, harder.
You had a show called Doppler at the 2021 Fringe, and that was based in a forest near Edinburgh. So how did you work with the landowner there to acquire the space, and what kind of things did you have to consider about actually using the land?
Yeah, so Doppler was actually National Trust for Scotland, so New Heels House and Gardens. And luckily, my colleague Ben had directed a couple of shows for them in their city centre buildings. So they knew of us and knew that we were trustworthy and that we knew what we were doing. So that bit of it was quite straightforward. And also they already had licences from East Lothian Council. So that just made everything a lot quicker. They were able to give us permission a lot quicker to do a sort of paid for public event there. But then the things we had to take into consideration and increasingly have to is the effect of climate and climate change on us, and also our effect on the land. So we always look at surrounding water table and what's going to happen when it rains. In August, particularly now, you know yourself over the past couple of years, we have to expect those massive downpours. So we'll get the whole month's rain in 2 or 3 days, but not consecutively. So you have to be sure that your ground isn't going to be waterlogged. And even though we had done all that research on the spot that we were in New Heels, and I had been travelling out for about a year, and I'd seen our location in all sorts of different weather, still those August downpours were difficult for us because we weren't a huge company, number of people, but even just the 20 odd people that we had working on that site for the couple of weeks gently changed the gradient and the sort of the nature of the ground. So we did lose a performance to a heavy downpour that just turned our sort of audience entrance into a quagmire. But the weather is a law unto itself. So, it's kind of winging a prayer a lot of the time. But also, we've done other work outside. We did a lovely children's show a few years ago that was in Camel Estate in Edinburgh, outside Edinburgh. And we had to, and it was in May, because it was with the Children's Festival, and it was a promenade, and the location we selected for our final scene, we just had to move a couple of meters one way because there was a badger set a new badger set that they discovered just about a month before we started working on site. So we needed to not annoy the baby badgers, and we needed the parent badgers to not attack our children. So, and also in that location, it had been an unusually hot spring. So a couple of our sites were around ruins. So Camo Estate is a site of like the first landscaped garden in Scotland, but also it has the one existing wall of the original estate house, and also around the site. Our site was about sort of 1.25 miles. They had a lovely stable sort of building, and we were going to have gorgeous sort of fairy tale scene there. But the ground dried out so much that the foundations became unsteady. So we couldn't work there. We couldn't rig our lights there. We couldn't bring an audience close to it. So you go, okay, well, we'll just move to a different bit of the forest and hope that there's nothing breeding there, or that the ground will, yeah. And then all around that is also a consideration about access. And not just for people with sort of mobility access issues, which we have to make sure is possible, but also, is there public transport to close to here? Can we try and make sure that people can get here as safely as possible? If people are coming in their cars, is it safe to turn out onto that main road? And the basics of, we're not just making this show for the locals, but if the locals can come, can they afford to come? You know, what's the impact going to be of an extra 20 cars or a bus trying to pull into this location? What's that going to do to the people living around the area? So all of that.
I'm interested, you were talking there about how you use National Trust for Scotland properties. So obviously they've got a website, you can phone them up, they're quite easy to work out, who you need to speak to maybe. So how do you actually go about when you find a piece of land and you don't know who owns it? Do you Google it? Do you then just go and speak to anyone that's nearby? How does it work?
We see, we're so old that we started when there wasn't Google. So Google is obviously our friend now, and even then it can be a bit impenetrable. But if nothing pops up in Google, or if nothing pops up, we'd go to the council. We'd ask, we'd find the best person in whatever council area that we were working in who might know a bit about deeds that are kept. We'd ask nearby people or businesses, send off a few speculative emails, or back in the day, just actual letters or front up on people's doorsteps. You can find out a bit through other kinds of artwork that has been generated around the location. Obviously, if it's a place of sort of local historical importance or natural beauty, it's generally easier to find out a wee bit more about it. Sometimes we just come to a complete dead end, and sometimes it's like, oh well, such and such used to own that, and you just can't find them. But generally, you can always at least get someone to go, yeah, it's mine, and no. But as I say, this is all part of it's part of the lovely challenge that you have, because by out of necessity, you get a greater understanding and respect for the piece of land or the building and the community that exists around it.
Thinking from the point of view of an audience, how aware are they of the performance spaces you're using, the land that they're in, and the importance of these places in the storytelling?
Well, it's sometimes we always try to fit the theme of the show to the location that we're in. We seldom do anything that's a sort of a direct exposition of the history of a place. Because there are other companies that do that, and they do that very beautifully. Although, as I say, Ben worked in like Gladstone's land and the Georgian House, and he wrote a play that directly related in each of those things to the history of the building. But quite often, like when you're doing something in a show, we made a show a few years ago in the now former Debenhams department store on Princess Street. So there, your audience know it very well, but they know it as a department store. They don't really know the history of that building, which is quite fascinating, because for a while, half was the sort of Scottish Conservatives, and I think half the Scottish Liberals. So there's a section in that building when it was Debenhams where I think Wallace had their concession, and it was Gladstone's library. You're like, I'm just going to buy my skirt in here, but this is a really, really protected place. So we do try to talk. We always give the building or the location or the organisation that we work with an opportunity to put information in our programme, so that the audience come away with more of an understanding about where they've been, even if it's not necessarily represented in our show. Yeah.
Do you think it's important that they have an idea of where they are and why you're using that specific piece of land?
Depends on what we want the outcome of the show to be. I think you always want people to come away with a better understanding or respect for the building or the surrounding area or the land. But you kind of want to pique, if the show isn't directly about that, you'd hopefully pique their interest enough that they might do a bit of research of their own, because we want to respect what they need to make happen there and all the things that are important. And to do that, we need them to understand why we would want to be there, know that we're going to take it all seriously and respect it. And ultimately, we'd like them to like us and what we do. But we've had some really, really beautifully fruitful relationships that have grown out of that have been great, I think, for us as theatre people. You know, sort of baggage handlers at Edinburgh Airport or security staff that would never think about going to see a play at all, that have got in touch months later and said, oh, I've just been to the Lyceum or I've just been to the Travers to see this because you introduced us to the fact that normal people can make theatre and that it could be for us. You know, the out of hours team in Debenhams were all, you know, the shelf stackers and the people doing the repairs to the building. Most of them were graduates from Edinburgh College of Art who, you know, were just making their ends meet. And so to just engage with them is really, really rewarding. You know, dinner ladies in the canteen down in the Burns Memorial Park. We did a show down there. That's not the right name of the park. It was a long time ago. But, you know, Burns Cottage and then, you know, all of that, you know, that they go from going, oh my God, we have to stay open an extra couple of hours to feed these 20 people that are doing something weird out in the path. And they then start to go, you're a stage manager. Oh, right. And, you know, it opens our respect for the places that we work, but it opens their understanding of what it means to work in this quite strange industry of ours.
I suppose in a way, site-specific theatre really has the ability, if you want it, to directly tell the story of land and of land issues. Do you think the wider arts circle can also engage and do that too?
Well, yeah. I mean, at the very basic level, when you think about, you know, landscape painting, and you think about, you know, naturalistic poetry, and you think about, you know, almost nothing that we do exists in a bubble, apart from obviously the increase in sort of digital work that we all have to do. But the one thing that resonates through probably all of the work that we have done, definitely some of the more political stuff, is that everyone wants a sense of belonging. Everyone has a clear sense of what home means to them, whether that's good or not. Most people appreciate a beautiful vista or a gorgeous sunset or a seascape. Not everybody. Most people appreciate some good architecture. So I think what it is that there's a lot more art and culture surrounding people than they realise, and that's fine. It's just about bridging the gap between what is perceived to be important as culture and what is just around you all the time. Yeah. So, I mean, I think it's that, and it's going to become even more important because we are losing parts of land and will continue to do so, even if global warming stops tomorrow. So that there's a big theme in our new play. One of the things that gave us an idea for it is potentially in 2050, the water line in Leith will be lapping against the doors of Leith Academy. And when you actually think about that as a concept, when you think about, I am standing in this place and in a few years' time, that building won't be there, those trees won't be there, that park will be covered, my house is underwater. It really maybe just sharpens the reality of things a little for everybody. We need to protect our land the same way we need to protect the history of it, the names of the land that we work on, what that means for good or ill about what's happened there before.
You can help us understand where we are
and where we've come from, and what might have been there before. If something's called Woody Hillock and there's not a wood there anymore, it's like something. What's going on here then? Just that sense of place, that sense of history, that sense of being part of something bigger than yourself, and increasingly what we can all do to try and preserve that for one another.
You mentioned your new show, Muster Station Leith. Can you tell me a wee bit about that?
Yes. So this is a commission from Edinburgh International Festival. It's the third time we will have presented at EIF. We seem to have managed to do one every more or less 10 years through our existence, which is great. They have been doing an artist's residency in Leith Academy for the past 4 years now. It was originally a 3-year residency, but got extended because of COVID. And they asked us to come on board as artists in residence for this last year. And that was great. We were delighted. Our office is about 10 minutes walk from the school. A lot of the incredibly talented actors and production team members and designers that we work with live very close. We were like, absolutely, this is a great way to engage with the school. And then EIF went, but maybe if you were going to make a show, what kind of show would you make here? So we looked at the building. We considered the community, the school community, who are extremely diverse. It's a wonderfully diverse school. Something like 30 languages from 60 countries are represented in the pupil body. So we looked at that, and then we looked at where it was in the city that we live in, and why a disparate group of adults might find themselves there of an August evening, when it's not really about being in a school. And we thought, schools and other municipal buildings will be repurposed and are repurposed when disasters are coming. And this was just pre the war in Ukraine, but post COP26. And we went, the big one, the big disaster that we can all understand with and need to engage with is, climate collapse. So we came up with the idea that the schools all over the country, including Leith, are being transformed into muster stations because there's a cataclysmic climate event coming our way. And it's based in reality, our fictional event, in that the Palma volcano eruptions. It has long been thought that if it goes big, it's going to create a massive tsunami that will take out Ireland, badly affect a lot of Europe, and badly affect the east coast of America. I'm an Irish person. This is not very good news for me. It's not good news for any of us, but it could potentially happen. So we are looking at a point 10 years in the future, in 2032, where climate changes continue to happen, where there's been a continued sort of downslide in the political health of our nations, and this big wave is coming. So the residents of Edinburgh have been told, report to your muster station, for onward transport. But each audience that we see, they will be asked to believe that they're the last group to leave. They're going to get out by the last mode of transport, or will they? And within that, we commissioned Ben Harrison, who I say is my colleague. He's directing it all, and he's writing a closing and opening scene around this whole concept. And he's writing a scene that takes place in the school swimming pool. But we're working with 3 other amazing writers: Tawona Satole, who's Zimbabwean and who's an artist in residence at University of Glasgow; Uma Nadaraja, who's a wonderful Canadian writer who lives in Scotland but is also an NHS nurse. She's also got a big show at the Fringe with the National Theatre of Scotland; and Nicola McCartney, who's Northern Irish but one of Scotland's most well-respected writers. She teaches playwriting at University of Edinburgh. They're all quite political. It's all about displacement. It's about what it feels like to have to seek refuge in another country. And of course, it sounds really bleak because, the wave is coming, but it is hopeful. We think it needs to be hopeful. I don't want to say too much about that, but the land plays a big part in the conclusion of the play and basically where we can be safe. So,
and people can catch that at the Leith Academy.
People can catch that at Leith Academy. You need to look on the Edinburgh International Festival website. It is sold out and has been for a wee while, but I would always suggest keeping an eye out in case we can release any more tickets or there are any returns. It's a promenade show, and we walk around different parts of the building. So Leith Academy remains the school building that it is. It's just been repurposed for a very different and slightly worrying purpose.
Good. Sounds like there's maybe some light and shade in there. It's not all doom and gloom.
It's not all doom and gloom. I mean, you have to have light and shade. There have to be. We're a very hopeful company, and we like to send people back out into the world with a bit more hope than despair. But I think this one, more than perhaps any of our previous shows to date, will hopefully make people think anew or think in a slightly different way about what we're doing to the people that have to move around our world and also the world that we live in.
Can I ask you, what do you think was your best location ever? Was it in Stavanger? And maybe if what was your best location ever, and why did that place work so well?
Yeah. I mean, it's hard to top having an island to work in that you have to row to, and that's filled with the most insanely talented people that are building boats. And that, I mean, just living in Norway for a couple of months just changed my complete attitude to life, because they just live with their environment a wee bit better than we do. Like the Norwegians, we'd have done our day's work, we'd be covered in waterproofs, the heavens would be open, we'd straggle into the pub looking like we'd just been washed up. And the Norwegians would just all wander in and take off their waterproofs and look perfect. And you go, there's no such thing as bad weather, there's just bad clothes kind of thing. But then we did a show called Decky Does a Bronco, three or four times over a 10-year period. And this is a show that was set in playgrounds. And actually it was set in a playground in Girvan on the west coast of Scotland by a playwright called Douglas Maxwell, who's excellent. That gave us the opportunity to travel all over Scotland and then England and Wales and Ireland looking for locations. So we really got, the first show was in 2000. So we really quickly got a really, really lovely understanding of the geography of the country that we live in, and the children who own playgrounds that we went to, and how different councils worked, and what it means if you want to try and do a show on a piece of land by a sea or by a river or, on the top of a hill or in, you just build up this knowledge of how to do things. But just getting to know, I mean, it's very important for us that we're a Scottish company, not just an Edinburgh company. That's why we constantly, we do the Fringe a lot, and we as I say, we've done EIF three times now, but we try to make work happen all over the country and not in sort of usual festival time, so that we're engaging more widely. But I mean, we did a show between wars in Beirut in a building that was the former Syrian General Security Building. So this is where Lebanese people or anyone trying to get out of Beirut, they were sort of held until they were given permission to leave or otherwise. So you can imagine the emotion and political sensitivity and everything around that. So, and it was extraordinary to just be in the Middle East and be there at a time of, well, quiet between massive unrest. Oh God, I mean, and then we did, we had the opportunity to do a show in Cork that allowed us to be back and forwards from Cork for a couple of years and then live there for a couple of months. And that was in a network of buildings that also contained the former city morgue. So the slab was still there, and the place where they would park the ambulance, and then the hearse would go for, and Cork's an amazing city. And then, of course, working at the airport, which was in 2006, you would not be able to do that now. But I mean, the Department for Transport changed the law for us to be able to do a show in the airport so that we could take our audience airside without going through security. So you can imagine what a huge, big deal that was. So I think Stavanger for the rowing and the airport for the massive, the fact that we could probably never do that again.
Jude, obviously throughout your career, you've learned to look at land and buildings in quite a unique way, seeing their potential, seeing what could be done. What advice would you have for people across Scotland looking at the land around them? How can they see the same potential?
I would say look twice and look better, and use the resources around you to find out a wee bit more about where it is you are and what you're doing. I mean, there's no greater solace to be had than being in nature or being in a beautiful landscape. Also being surrounded by beautiful architecture, but you have to have your eyes open and you have to be paying attention to it, and you have to leave it either the way you found it or better, So, and I hope that people found out a bit more about the countries that we live in by not being able to travel to the south of Spain as easily as possible. I mean, oh my God, you just, go to a Scottish island and you'll think you're in paradise. Might be a little bit colder, you may get wet. But I think that's just, very applicable for looking at things.
And being curious as well, maybe.
Yeah. I mean, my mum and dad were art teachers, and we lived in a beautiful place in Northern Ireland in the middle of the countryside called McGilligan. And you were never allowed to say you were bored. And if you were bored, you were turfed out the house to count the grass, my dad would always say. But just, it was like, you can't be bored. You're surrounded by beautiful things. Just go out and have a look and, engage a bit more.
Brilliant. So that's it for episode 8 of the Lay of the Land podcast. Thank you so much to Judith for sharing her creative journey with us. Her advice for us to look and look again at the land around us really stuck with me, and hopefully something we'll all strive to do every day. Gridiron's newest work, Muster Station Leith, is taking place at this year's Edinburgh International Festival. Although already sold out, keep your eyes peeled for any resales. If you would like more information about how you might get involved in the way land is owned and used in your area, visit myland.scot for stories, news and case studies for what's happening with the land around you. Join us for the next episode soon.